Welcome, everyone, to another episode of What's Your Story? We are sitting at the Graves Library in the reading room in the nice, cool air conditioning. It's pretty hot out there, so when you think about cooling off, always think about the library as a cooling center. So it really does help, and there's plenty of reading to do when you come inside. So today I have the great pleasure of sitting down with Elizabeth Grant. Elizabeth and I became friends, I would say, the last couple of years. And I wanted to have Elizabeth here today because I don't really know a whole lot about you, and I think you probably have a pretty major story to tell. So we're going to start off with where you were born and where you went to school in your earlier years.
All right. Well, first off, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I was born in Durham, North Carolina. Some people say they can pick up a tiny bit of a Southern inflection. The people who say that, I say, well, you haven't heard a real Southern accent if you haven't heard it, if you think I have one. But and I spent all of my youth and up through high school in Durham, North Carolina. My parents were faculty at Duke University teaching French. And when I went to college, I did not want to stay there and did not want to go to Duke. No disrespect to Duke, but it was time for me to have my own experience in my own place. So I went to college at Cornell University and then went to law school at George Washington University in Washington, D.C. And that's where I spent all of my adulthood until I moved here.
I knew there was something amazing about you.
Well, lots of lawyers in Washington, so.
So what did you do? What did you do there? You were.
My field of specialty was government contract law, which is very similar to commercial contract law. It's, two parties have an objective and they work out the terms and have a contract, and you agree to do X for me and I agree to pay you Y, and hopefully all goes swimmingly. And of course, that's not often what happens. But when the government's involved, it's taxpayer money that's being spent. So there's all kinds of policies that go on. You can't give your roofing contract to your brother-in-law, which you could do if you're re-roofing your house. And when things go wrong, costs and how costs are compensated for is handled totally differently. And the government can get out of contracts a little easier than a commercial party can because of government objectives and policies. So there's this fundamental underpinning of basic contract law, but a lot of nuances on top of that really create a whole bunch of subspecialties. So I worked for a private law firm for a couple of years first, and then decided to work for the government. I worked for one of the defense agencies. And that's where I spent most of my career. And then the last few years I was a judge at one of the boards that deals with the disputes that come out of government contract law.
Goodness.
So if people can't agree, then you go to litigation. And I preferred doing alternative dispute resolution and working with parties on mediation, which was my big love. And that's usually the most effective way to resolve a dispute anyway. But when people don't want to do that and want to continue to litigation, then you have to have a forum for the case. So that's sort of in a nutshell my professional career.
Wow. And so when you moved up here, when was that?
That was 7 years ago.
Okay.
I retired on a Thursday afternoon, and Saturday morning at 7 a.m. got in the car with my husband and 4 cats to drive 10 hours to move to Kennebunkport. So you could tell I couldn't wait. I've always considered Kennebunkport my soul home, and it seems like my whole life was just sort of a prelude for my real life, which I consider my time here. So it's just a favorite spot for me.
So were you, as far as getting here, did you have friends that were here, or did you summer? Did you come in the summer?
Yes, it's a classic example of many families. Actually, I have ancestors who lived in this area for many centuries ago. In fact, one of my ancestors is John Mitchell of the Mitchell Garrison, the property that's now the Franciscan Monastery. And my husband always says to me, "Why did you all ever let that property get out of your family?" Like, well, yeah. And then actually my main connection, my primary, no pun intended, connection through to Kennebunkport is through the Peabody line, and my great-great-great-grandfather lived here. I'm not sure. I don't believe he was born here. I can't recall. And then his kids were born here, and then after that. So my great-great-grandparents' house is at Beach Avenue, right where the corner of Beach Avenue and Doan's Wharf Lane is. And I have pictures of my mother as a child playing on the lawn of that house with her, visiting her grandparents, who, of course, were my great-grandparents. So anyway, like all the stories you hear from so many people, that at some point somebody lived here, but then kids grew up and went off and sold the ancestral home, but their kids grew up and came back and then brought their kids. So because my parents were faculty at Duke, we had a little longer vacation in the summer than some people do. It was not a full 3 months. My father was either teaching summer school or they were writing or there were responsibilities involved. But we would take about 4 weeks in the summer, drive the 2 hideous days, drive up 95 from North Carolina to southern Maine, and spend 2 weeks in Kennebunkport and then 2 weeks with my father's family in New Hampshire. And so I just always felt like this was my soul home. And
that is wonderful.
we
are very glad that you settled here.
Thank you.
So, and we have lots of fun with Elizabeth. You have been doing lots of things with us as far as programs go. And I know that you've done a lot of volunteer work in the area. You are past president of the Garden Club?
Yes, the Seacoast Garden Club. I just finished a 2-year tenure as co-president with a colleague of mine, and I've been a member of the club for 7 years in different positions, and I'll continue on the board after this presidency tenure. And I think that's partially how I got to know you, because the Graves Gardens are part of one of the gardens that the Seacoast Garden Club tends. When I was a child, I always came here for books. Nancy Drew was my favorite book, and I remember just coming here, the smell of the library, seeing the ivy all over the walls, which is beautiful but not particularly helpful for the mortar.
Right.
So I always had this affinity for Graves Library, and I'm a huge bookworm, so anything library related was just right up my alley. But didn't get to know you or have a more present-day experience of the library until the gardens first, and then some of the other programming that the library has offered, which has been really very inventive and creative and beneficial to the community and me personally.
Well, I thought that if I left the front yard and just let it go, somebody would come in and rescue the library. So it worked, but I can't thank you all enough for the amazing contribution, the work that you do. When I drive up in the morning, when I leave at night, it is just beautiful out there. And I look at all the other gardens that are managed around town, and in a busy time of year when you all, I'm sure, have beautiful gardens at your homes, you're still taking the time to make sure that our town looks wonderful. So we really appreciate that.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to do that and to know we're not just gardening, but gardening in a way that helps make the community feel richer and more special.
And it really does. I mean, when you drive through Dock Square, when you go to the post office here, there's other places that are taken care of. I mean, it's really... I don't know, it just says a lot for how much people care about the community, and especially the Garden Club. How many members are?
We have approximately 90 members. I think it's like 88.
Wow.
About 50 plus are active, and just under 40 are sustaining members. The sustaining members can't become sustaining until they meet certain tenure requirements or age requirements or both. And then they can participate as much or as little as they want. So we have some sustaining members who are getting quite on in years and don't really stay terribly active, but catch the emails or stay caught up on what's going on with the club. Others who are very active, chairs of committees, chairs of gardens, very involved with that. So it kind of varies. But generally we have about in the low 50s of active members.
And you're not doing just gardening or, tending. You have lectures that you do, and everybody participates and learns a lot of things. So it's not just getting out there and...
We have from the October through May timeframe, we have monthly speakers. Of course, this past year with COVID, that had to be done via Zoom, and with some adjustments for some programs that didn't lend themselves to that type of transmission. But you certainly learn more about it, and it helps inspire you when you get discouraged sometimes with your own garden or your own efforts. Then you have one of these programs, you come away all fired up about whatever it is you've just learned. So,
where do you go to buy your plants? And I always like to know, because I kind of get stuck in my rut. And
It varies. Estabrook's is the closest, so I tend to go there some, but I also go a lot to both Gray Farm and Joanne's in Berwick.
Okay, yeah.
And just recently I had my first trip to Broadway Gardens in South Portland, which I've heard about for forever, and it's certainly a fabulous place, although it's a bit of a trek if you feel like you can hit something a little closer.
Yeah.
And then there's some smaller little spots where you can do, hit or miss. This year has been really tough with the garden centers because partially we had a relatively warm and early-ish spring, and also everyone was just busting to get out and do stuff, so they got sold out of various things, or their stock got depleted much earlier than normal, and trying to replenish all that. So that's been a challenge too.
The and this heat. To be out there doing, ooh.
Fortunately, I think it's going to pass. It's more than anything, we're praying for the rain because and I know that ruins people's summer plans, but the gardens are just dying, and personal gardens as well as ours, and they're constantly watering and trying to
keep up
with that. Yeah.
So, what are the things like locally? What do you and your husband do now that you're retired? What do you like to do?
Well, when we moved here, a colleague of mine had told me that you're supposed to approach retirement as if you're a freshman in college and don't declare a major.
I love that.
So don't come planning on, I'm going to do A, B, C, and D. And I found that really was so true. Of course, all you have to do is have a major interstate move, and that'll solve part of your problem for the first few months of moving here. But we got actively involved with South Congregational Church, and I've been, until recently, on the Board of Deacons and then chair of the Board of Deacons, and my husband has been involved with some in different capacities there, and that's been very rewarding to us on a number of levels. And also they started a hand chimes choir, which is different from handbells. The hand chimes are more stick-like. They almost look like tuning forks. And if you had said to me, well, when you retire, do you think you're going to go be a member of a hand chimes choir? I would have said no. I wouldn't have opposed it, but it just never was on my radar screen. And I have really enjoyed that, and I've ended up being sort of the administrator. Our organist choir director is, of course, the one who directs and manages the choir, but the chimes choir. But that's just been super fun to do. Also, I got really involved in my French studies, which is another thing. If you had said, do you think when you're in Kennebunkport you're going to resume interest in your French studies, I would have said, probably not. Yeah. But weirdly enough, you'd think being in Washington, D.C., I would have had occasion to use my French, and I really didn't. And then up here, periodically, you cross paths with the French Canadians, and you start realizing how rusty you are. And this is a whole other story, but I've done a number of things in the last 5 years, both through in-person organizations, online organizations, and then meeting up with friends and talking and trying to get as much rust off my French as possible and being more proficient in it. And I've really, really enjoyed that. And that's a surprise to me. And I think part of that is that when you're studying French in school, there's always tests. And is this noun masculine or feminine? And do you have the right past tense for this and that? And it gets annoying even if you like the language or the subject. But when you're just talking with friends and just being together and connecting, then language is really a bridge and not a barrier. And we all know language is supposed to be a bridge. It helps you communicate with people who don't speak your language. But when that little sensor in your mind is stopping you and you're stuttering over the words or the phraseology, it shuts you down, and you just feel like someone else of a different language is removed from you because of that language barrier. And that is, in fact, true. But when you can free yourself up and say, okay, the point is connecting and communicating with this person. And yes, ideally you'd like to be as accurate as possible and improve, as much as you can. But it's not because you're being tested on it. It's because you can play with it and have fun with it. So.
And I think the small group that you have just formed, you're doing a little bit of that every couple weeks, I think.
Right. Yeah.
So, do you find it different that you have there's a little bit of Canadian French, there's a little bit of Parisian? No. Or are you all connecting pretty well?
I think it's pretty well. Everyone has a slight accent. None of us is truly bilingual, although one of the members in the club is probably notably the best, and her accent and her grasp of the language is the best. But it's just a little varied, and everybody that I've been speaking French with, I do have a friend who lives in Kennebunk who is native French, so of course when I speak with her French is perfect, but and her accent is perfect. But I have to say, most of the people I've connected with, their accents are quite good, but of course they're not French accents, so you're kind of used to hearing a different accent. In fact, sort of a funny story, one of the women in another group I'm with is British, and I did not know that. The first time I met her was at my French group, and we're speaking French, and she had a good accent, a good French accent, and I just naively assumed she was American. Everybody else that I met was American. And so I made some joking comment about the British, and she sort of looked a little taken aback. I mean, not just sort of a little surprised, and it wasn't until later in the conversation when someone else said, "So how did you end up here from England?" I kind of perked up and I said, "Oh, well, did you live in England?" And she says, "I am English." And I thought, oh, great. And so I kind of dug myself out of that hole, and it now became a joke between the two of us. But that's an example. If you speak a foreign language, it actually can kind of obscure your own background. One of the members in our group has a Southern accent, and her French accent probably has a touch of that, but I don't think it's as pronounced as her American accent would be.
That's interesting.
We have the common denominator of the French language, so some of these little funny stories come up.
I think it's when I meet people, and there's many students that will come to work here in the summertime on a work visa. And when I first started working here at the library, I was upstairs in the children's room, one internet computer. And so all of these students would be coming in from everywhere. And it was so interesting to me that I actually got a map of the world and put it out in the vestibule. And I had people put pins. And it was amazing to see where some of these people came from. And it made me realize, and I guess I should have realized this long ago, but as somebody growing up in the United States and not having to learn another language, boy, when you meet somebody that knows 3, sometimes 4 languages, like how special is that? And they pick it up probably, just like that. But I took French when I was in high school, but never had to speak it, really. You conjugate verbs, and but either that or Spanish too. And now I think you really need to, do the app Duolingo, or one of those that helps with Rosetta Stone, helps with learning. And I think it's really important.
There's a lot of programs out there, and I've been involved with 2 different ones on the internet. One that has a live Zoom chat with other people, and another one that isn't live exactly, but has been super, super helpful for me. So, there's a lot available.
It's great that you're keeping it up.
Yeah, it's been fun. So that's, I guess, a part answer to what you were doing. Oh, and the writing group.
And our writing group, yes.
I've always enjoyed writing. I've written a few short stories and a little bit of poetry. But you have a full-time job and a busy life, and I would sort of sit down and wait for the muse to come visit, and the muse never came to visit, or almost never came to visit. And so you just sort of say, okay, well, I'm one of these people who would ask authors, how do you get your ideas? Because it seems like I can't ever come up with ideas. And I think sometimes you need that downtime and that free time to let the brain cultivate this, and almost like the morning after you've slept, and your mind has been doing this download during the night, and then fresh ideas come to you. And I was really pleased when the Graves Library started this writing group that's not necessarily for people who are trying to get published. It's, I suppose, up to any individual, but just to encourage people to take time out to write. And actually I started doing that a little bit last summer, and was able to come up with more ideas, little vignette things. I mean, nothing involved like a short story with a plot and drama and characterization and all that, but little things just to say. In fact, it was my British friend through that French group. Well, she's doing a lot of work writing her memoir, so I was complaining to her about I want to write, but no ideas come to me, and was explaining my story, and she says, "You're thinking too big." And I said, "Well, I'm just thinking short stories. I'm not thinking the great American novel." And she says, "No, just try even a few of these writing prompts, simple little paragraphs." And it was because of her encouragement that I started writing. And then when I found the group, I was a little too busy with some of my responsibilities with these organizations right when it started, but then picked up in January, and that's been very rewarding.
And we're very glad you did. I love listening to any of your writing. There was a story that you read to us about being in the library and finding something. Can you talk a little? That's one of my favorites.
We had to write a story, and we started limiting our time to 500 words because we had 1 hour, and we're all sharing our stories. So there's 8 or 9 of us in the group, and after a while, you've got to cut it somehow. But we had said, pick a first sentence of some book, and let that be the first sentence of your story, and then you write whatever you want from it. And so I actually picked the first sentence of Jane Eyre, and for those of you who don't have that memorized, there was no possibility of taking a walk that day. And here in Maine, one of the obvious reasons that would mean there was no possibility of taking a walk is a snowstorm. So I write about the character who's getting ready to curl up with a book and her cup of tea and her throw and the cat in her lap and all those things that us bookworms love to do on a snowy day. Reading a book that she checked out from the library, and she opens the book up and a piece of paper falls out from between its pages. And that actually has happened to me with library books, somebody's bookmark or someone's grocery list. And I'm sure your staff, when they get the books, try to make sure that nothing, either of value or even not of value, is left in the books.
We call that riffling.
Riffling, yes. But occasionally something will get stuck there. So I made up a story about a little letter that had fallen out. And that had not happened to me. I have not found a letter in a library book. And the little story about the very short letter, and then the reader who then starts thinking more about some things she wants to do because of what she read in the letter. So that was kind of fun. And
that was a great story.
It was hard to, a lot of times I've found it very difficult to, I know the group is great about saying you don't have to write about what the suggested topic is. And so sometimes there's been a suggested topic and I'm really struggling with it. And I'm this close to saying, I think I'll go off and do something else. And I say, no, try it. And then I end up with something that I really like. And that's happened several times. So I'm trying to, I don't want to say discipline myself. That sounds very rigid or not fun. But I'm trying to have faith in the process that something interesting and creative can come out of it. And if not, if it's one of your pieces, it's not so great. Big woo.
Yeah,
so
that's
what?
right. That's right. And I think just coming to the table, so to speak, and just being able to share something, and it's and just getting your juices flowing. I think that's the big thing. Can we go back to your career and talk a little bit more about when you were in Washington, and sort of give me a day in the life of when you were there working?
I'd probably do it from when I was with the agency that I was with. When I was a judge, it was just very quiet. I mean, you were working, most of the time you were not on the bench listening to trials, and in fact a lot of the cases could be handled in various paper proceedings. So it was quiet, calm, some people would say boring, or the pace wouldn't be very varied. When I was with the agency, it's very much what I described as an emergency room kind of environment. You were always understaffed. You were always up against big, pricey law firms who had tons of resources they could throw at problems. You had issues where your clients would come in and they had a draft letter. Some congressman or senator had written in on behalf of a constituent complaining about something that wasn't going the way the constituent wanted. And the senators usually careful about how they phrase it. They don't want to say, I totally agree, my constituent is right, because the constituent might be a flake. But they're still saying, my constituent has this concern, would you look into it? So then you have to answer the question, and you have to answer it with the right tone and style and approach and enough detail to be responsive, but without overcommitting. Very nuanced, very diplomatic. And in fact, even though I don't do, and particularly until recently, I don't do much creative writing, my whole professional career has been spent writing. It's just been writing nonfiction. It's been writing legal letters, documents, briefs, or opinions. And the craftsmanship you have to take to write those well and effectively is very precise. People will make pejorative comments about, that's just wordsmithing, when somebody edits their paper. That's just happy to glad kind of change. And it would always frustrate me, and it still does, to say wordsmithing. Since when did wordsmithing get to be a criticism? I mean, goldsmiths are not viewed as in a critical light. Silversmiths aren't. I mean, wordsmiths are craftsmen and women of the words they are using, and happy and glad do have different meanings. Now, on short time constraints, you can't finesse things forever, and so part of my work would be to whatever written product was leaving, whether it was under my signature, which was usually not the case, or under a client's signature, how quickly, because you'd have someone say, I have to get this out in 30 minutes. And you half the time you don't know what the facts are. You're trying to understand what the facts are. You're trying to parse all that through. So it was a very, just do the best you can as fast as you can. And in fact, my former boss would say that it's not enough to write well. You have to write well fast, because you don't have a chance to rework your documents very much.
And that is your weapon. I mean, that is what
Yes.
you have to use to, get your point across, to get, that is really all you have, unless you go and be in front of a judge,
In person,
right?
or negotiating, or trying to
Yeah.
persuade through what you're saying orally, but it's
Yeah.
still your words.
Yeah.
I had split, ambivalent feelings about all this. Particularly in the beginning, it was less split because I like problem solving, and man, boy, did I have the opportunity to do that. Not that I could always solve the problem, but at least I could try to
Sure.
proceed. But you also had the sense you were always helping somebody else. And after a while, after 30 years of this, you start having a sense of where's the self-actualization, where's my reward, other than you get great pleasure at feeling like you prevented some disaster from happening, or you provided an alternate course when you couldn't proceed. The political pressure, often from within the agency, was not good at all. I mean, you were they want to do X, and you're supposed to find a way to say yes. And of course, we often would, or say no, and then you can provide a plan B. But every once in a while, it would just get down to you felt you were very forced. And someone asked me if I had difficulty making the change from being an agency attorney to being a judge, and I said not really. And I said that one of the differences is at the agency, I would wake up at night worrying about an issue that I knew the answer to, but I was afraid I couldn't persuade anybody to the answer, and I was going to be forced to do something that wouldn't be comfortable for my level of knowledge of the law.
Yeah.
When I was a judge, I might wake up at the night worrying about how can I get this right.
Oh, yeah.
And I'd much rather wake up in the night worried about trying to get it right than worried about how I can evade pressure that's being put on me to produce a certain result.
Right.
So,
Students going to law school now, any advice you would give them? Or even thinking about that career?
I've been out of this for a while. I mean, even when I was in it, I wasn't really dealing with the young folks coming in, so I'm not sure I'm terribly knowledgeable about it. I would certainly encourage them to consider that and explore that. But I ended up doing very well my first year in law school. That doesn't sound like a problem, but it sort of automatically puts you in a certain swim lane where you were sort of expected to go along a certain path. And overall, it worked out well for me, but I almost wished I'd explored after law school, or by your third year when you're starting to look for a job, that I had explored more alternate types of legal practice. But at the time, it was just very much, you go into a law firm and the only question is what city, how big the law firm, and what specialty.
Yeah.
And there was a little bit of recognition that there were other options, but it just didn't seem to be the other options sort of seemed to be viewed as for those who couldn't make it, doing really well, which is certainly not the kind of message you want to be sending. And I suspect that's different now. So I'm realizing my information's pretty dated at this point.
Well, but still, I mean, I think there's a lot of people who, I think you either know or you don't know. That's one profession I think that's where you want to be. So.
And I never really knew that I wanted to be a lawyer. In fact, when I was in college, I ended up majoring in history. There's really no pre-law like there is pre-med, but a lot of history, political science, or English majors are still thinking about law school.
Yeah.
I didn't even know how many years law school was. And I had to ask one of my colleagues, how many years? I'm thinking about going to law school. How many years is that? It's like, I just had no idea. 3, if you're wondering. But that's the level of knowledge that at college level I didn't even know that. I mean, my parents were faculty, and I figured I'd either be a professor or a doctor. And once I met chemistry in high school, I knew I had to rethink my career plans to be a cardiac surgeon. And so that didn't really leave me with a whole lot. So I think now there's so much more available with guidance counselors or these testings. What are your aptitudes?
Right.
Not like the old scholastic aptitude test, SAT, which arguably has nothing to do with aptitude. But personality profiling and where your strengths and weaknesses are and what types of career fields are good matches for you that would be rewarding. And there was none of that. There may have been elsewhere in other high schools, but not where I went to high school. And you were just on your own.
Yeah, and that's hard because there's a big wide world out there.
And at high school level, it's different because my parents were a fan of the philosophy of go to a school, the best school you can get into that you can afford, that is generally a generalist school, unless you know, if you're one of these people who knew at age 10 that you want to be a nuclear physicist, okay, well then you can go that direction. But to let college be that growing and blossoming and experimenting time. So these types of tests and inquiries I don't think are as important at the high school level, or at least not with the consequences that are as significant. But by the time you get into college and now you're starting to think about post-grad work or going straight into a job, then I think there needs to be a lot of robust options available. And I don't know if Cornell must have had whatever was considered to be the norm at that time. This was 78 when I graduated from Cornell, so that's a long time ago. There either wasn't much available, or I didn't take that much advantage of it, or whatever. So I suspect there's more with that. So I would encourage, it's sort of a long answer to your question, but I would encourage someone going into law school to play around with the options. Other than that, not meaning that I'm dissuading them from that, but to really think about what makes you tick, and then if you want law, what type, not just the subject matter. I often think that if I were to do it again, I might do more trust and estate planning work on that. A lot of tax stuff on that. So if you're not thrilled by tax law, then you got some issues. And most people aren't all excited about tax laws. Bad enough doing their own taxes. Never mind about advising on other people's.
That's true.
But that's a very portable profession. Wherever you end up, people need estate planning.
Yeah, they do.
And it's like a contract with yourself. You're when you write your will, you're trying to decide, how do I want the system to dispense my assets, both the monetary ones and your personal property and things like that. So it's kind of an interesting idea.
Well, you could always hang a shingle.
Actually, no, I'm not licensed in Maine. I'm sorry. I decided I wasn't even going to go there. Crossing the Rubicon, no going back, right?
Yeah. And you need to enjoy now.
Right.
You worked long and hard, so. So when you come into the library to pick out books, do you have a list? Is there somewhere that you get a lot of your selection from?
No is the short answer to that question. I do it a lot through question and answer. A colleague, a friend of mine who I won't give names, but I know you know, is active with the library. I'd seen her at one point and was talking about a certain series of books that I'd really liked, and she recommended another series, and I started the book one on that, and I adored that, and I just plowed my way through this series. So some of it is just asking friends, what have you read and what have you liked? And I've had a number of successes that way. Successes meaning books that not only I've enjoyed, but I've really loved it if there's a series that I've wanted to continue reading. I've had a few where I either read the book and it didn't do much for me, or sometimes even wouldn't even finish reading the book. I was just talking to someone today who mentioned an author that she thought I should check into, so I was going to check on the online catalog to see if you have books by this person, and if there's a series, start at the beginning. But no, a lot of times I'll just go into the library, pull a book off the shelf, read the first page, and see if I like the style of writing. That's very hit or miss. So I kind of wish I had a better system.
Well, everybody has a system. That's the interesting thing, and no matter who I talk to, it's always different. So I think I like listening to how you come in with either that list, like the groceries that you're going to go pick up at the at the store, or many people like to just browse, and they will browse an entire letter of the alphabet or an entire section of the Dewey Decimal System. So I'm always curious about that. Do you have a favorite, memoir or fiction or historical fiction, or you just kind of read around the map?
Generally, I read around the map. I've always massively preferred fiction to nonfiction, and part of my philosophy, and I'm sure people would just have different opinions about this, but a fiction book that's sort of okay-ish is okay. A nonfiction book that's okay-ish is a real tough slog.
Is it?
And so I feel like you can get away with more in a fiction book. But it's just interesting. Recently I've finished 4 nonfiction books and I've loved all of them. Or actually one's a little bit historical fiction. And so now I've kind of gotten totally by accident on this nonfiction kick, and my husband saw how interested I was in one of them and got me another book by the same author.
Oh, good.
In fact, this book was also from this library couple. I saw it at their house, and I said, can I borrow this? The title intrigued me, and I borrowed the book, and to my huge surprise, I just really got completely into it and went off and ordered 2 copies, one for myself and one as a gift for somebody else. So I love those little stories, you know, the pebble in the water that just, causes these ripple
absolutely.
effects.
And that is I think such a gift to be able to give to people is, here, try this.
Sharing a friend,
and
the book. Yeah.
And I try that in here sometimes, and people will come in, and I know they didn't like something because they immediately walk the other way.
Yeah. they don't
want me to ask them, how did you like that, such and such.
I didn't like it at all.
And I never take anything personally when it comes to that. So
I will say on your question about historical fiction, one of the books that's been the most impressive for me that I discovered many, many years ago, although I haven't and I've reread it several times, is by a woman named Valerie Fitzgerald, and it's called Zemendar. And it's about a young woman in her early 20s who goes to India under certain circumstances and is present in India during the siege of Lucknow and the Cawnpur Mutiny. And it's a long book, which is good. I love long books because if I like them, then I feel like, oh, good, I've still got plenty more. I'm not about ready to finish it yet. And I knew nothing about the British in India at that time, or I really knew very little about the British in India, period. But certainly, and I'd heard of the Cawnpur massacre, but I knew zero details about it. I'd never heard of the siege of Lucknow. And there's a slow build-up, so you're not just pitchforked into some of this wartime drama. And the characterization and the problem of the British, their views of the Indian populace and some of the lurking tensions that then started exploring. It's a very, very readable book. And I think it captures a lot of what life was like at that time in both of those arenas, which would be very, very foreign for us, especially the Indian arena. But even the British, that stiltedness and that perspective is not something we're as used to today. So that's one that's really resonated with me.
Good to know.
Yeah.
All right, we are going to start our rapid fire question round. Are you ready for that?
I'm ready.
Okay. So, what is your favorite color?
Blue.
Favorite book? I think you might have just said it.
No, it was one of the books by Jane Austen, and I'd be hard-pressed to pick which. Do I have to?
No, you don't. No, you don't.
Do I have to?
Favorite vacation spot?
Well, it was Kennebunkport before I moved here. Bermuda, I guess, would be.
Okay, I like that one too. Do you have a favorite restaurant? And it doesn't have to be here.
In town. 2. There was one in Northern Virginia, L'Auberge chez François, which is François' Shelter, I guess you want to call it. Very nice upscale restaurant, way away through all the hectic suburbia traffic in the Beltway and everything. So it would take, you'd have to go on a weekend, because if you went weeknight, it took 2 hours to drive there.
Oh my!
That's because of the traffic. Here we really like, there's a number of ones at different categories, but the one we go to for birthdays and anniversaries is Ocean at Cape Arundel Inn.
Oh, nice. Nice.
Really like that.
Do you have a favorite cocktail or wine?
Wine is my big go-to drink. I rarely have hard alcohol. Occasionally I'll do some kind of vodka martini or Cosmo or something, but and the dry whites and the medium reds, dry medium reds are sort of my favorites.
Yeah, and you are very, very knowledgeable about wine. I have to say, I really enjoy when we are on our wine Zooms that you always have really good things to say.
Thank you. That's a compliment. I wouldn't want to be queried too closely on my knowledge.
And something that you like to do locally.
Love to walk the beach barefoot, Gooch's Beach. That's my number one thing.
Nice. Very nice.
In fact, it was hard last year. I was having some back surgery, and they said you may not walk on the sand, either barefoot or even in shoes. If you walk, you have to be on the sidewalk. And I was walking along the sidewalk, watching everybody on the sand.
That must have been a real heartbreaker.
Yes. So I've been out a lot this summer.
There you go. Good. And your favorite library?
Your favorite library, Grace Library.
We love that answer.
Which is actually true. I mean, it's not it's not just canned for the program. It really is. It has a lot. It's got a lot of diversity. It's got a lot of personality. I've loved all the things you've done with programs to make the library part of the community and not just some place you go and you get a book and then you leave and then you come back in this sort of distance. So I think you've done a great job.
Wow, thank you. Thank you for being our guest today.
My
pleasure. We really appreciate it. And I'm so glad I got to learn a little bit more about you. Well, so now I'm just going to be asking you all kinds of questions about which book have you read and which. No, so
Happy to share. My
I
pleasure
love
to
that.
be here.
I love
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. So thanks for being with us, and we'll see you next time on What's Your Story?